Greece, Cyprus, ancient Rome and the Middle East. The University of Sydney's Nicholson Collection of Antiquities is on display at its Chow Chak Wing Museum. In this podcast series, we hear from the museum's curators and academics about the fascinating story these objects tell about ancient cultures and civilisations. We hear about the work of the university's archaeologists and the digs they're involved in. We also speak to Professor Vratidas Karalis about the current state of play with the return of the Parthenon marbles to Athens. The Nicholson Collection of Antiquities. You can subscribe for free to this Arts Wednesday podcast series at eastsidefm.org/series.
So today I'm talking to Candace Richards, who's the acting curator of the Nicholson Collection. That's the Antiquities Collection at the University of Sydney's Chow Chak Wing Museum. Candace is also the president of the Society of the Mediterranean Archaeology, and she's also co-chair of the Sydney chapter of the Australasian Women in Ancient World Studies. Candace, thanks so much for talking to us today.
Thanks for having me.
So Candace, you're an archaeologist. I guess my first question is, what brought you to this point? How did you get into curatorial work?
I am an archaeologist, and I really love objects and learning from the past through stuff that people have left behind is the essence of archaeology. And so when I started kind of undergraduate kind of degrees at the University of Sydney, I was really interested in material culture and material cultural studies. And I, of course, started volunteering with the museum on campus, which was the Nicholson. And so by being part of that as a student and learning from the collection, it kind of really drove my passion for working with Australia's largest collection of antiquities. And really, I've had such hands-on experience over the last 15 years with the collection that when a role came up to work curatorially, I kind of jumped at the chance.
Jumped at it, yeah, I don't blame you. I myself have fond memories losing myself between tutorials at the old Nicholson Museum. I think Michael Turner was the curator then. And now that you have this brand new museum, and who could deny it, do you miss the old one?
I actually don't. This is a question we do actually get asked a lot. And part of the reason for that is because the old museum, I've got lots and lots of fond memories there, don't get me wrong, was just really not suitable for a collection of this kind. But also, things like, it didn't have the right lighting. It didn't have the right kind of feel for the objects. And so the objects now, when they've been put into places where there's natural light and all these kind of modern museum technology, really lets the collection shine in the way that it was unable to before because of the infrastructure. So that, I know it's really surprising because a lot of people ask about the old Nicholson, and I definitely have some nostalgia there, but the new museum just allows us to give such a beautiful elevated platform for the antiquities that they just deserve to have.
The Nicholson Collection, it's the largest collection of antiquities in the Southern Hemisphere.
Correct. You
have 30,000 artistic and archaeological objects of significance to care for and play with. The collections are from Egypt, Cyprus, Italian, there's Greek, and there's the Levantine collection as well. They date back to the Stone Age, to late medieval period. Can you tell us about the collection? What really sticks out for you as well?
Yeah, you're right. The breadth of the collection is astounding. We have so many different types of materials around that Mediterranean basin, as you say, but also extending right through the Middle East and throughout Europe as well. The strengths of the collection are definitely, Egypt, Middle East, Greece, Cyprus and Italy. And what's really interesting, and the thing that I love the most about it, is that I get to look at all the cultural interactions that occurred in antiquity through the collection, these places that often people think are really separate or distinct and different, and they've definitely got their own cultural attributes, actually interplay and mix with each other throughout history, right throughout history. And I think that's one of the best parts about working across a variety of collections and a variety of cultural materials, is being able to draw those ideas together. And that's something that I'm really kind of focused on and what I like to do, especially in places like Cyprus, which is, if you look at a map of the Mediterranean, put it in the middle, it's smack bang in the middle of everything, and there's so many cultures that interplay there it becomes fascinating how we all work together as humans. That's the part I love the most about it.
You mentioned the dig, the excavation in Cyprus. Can you tell us about the excavations and the archaeological projects overseas that the university has been and still is very much involved in? Because I think there's also one in Jordan, is there?
Yeah, absolutely. You're speaking to me actually during National Archaeology Week, and there's lots of different projects that the University of Sydney is part of. We have a range of different excavation projects run by the Department of Archaeology, places like Angkor Wat. You're right, Pella in Jordan is a huge project that's been running for over 40 years. We have a range of different projects happening in places like Serbia, in a Roman palatial site. But the dig that I've been most involved with is actually our excavations at a Hellenistic and Roman theatre at a site called Nea Paphos in Cyprus. Its main kind of interest is the theatre and the theatre structure. But the archaeological excavations, which actually started in 1995, have uncovered a range of different kinds of information about urban infrastructure, how materials get recycled and reused, and that's actually what my research is based on, as well as things like medieval settlements and through the Crusader period kind of archaeology. So it's a really fascinating site in Cyprus that the University of Sydney kind of go back to every year. Unfortunately, with COVID, we've had to stop some of our excavation work, but hopefully we'll be picking that back up again as soon as borders and things like that open. Yeah,
because the Crusader thing was quite. They were there for quite a while in Cyprus, especially Kyrenia. I think there's the big fort there in Kyrenia.
Indeed. There's lots of different kind of Crusader period sites all over. Richard the Lionheart famously kind of bought part of the island and sold it off a year later kind of style. So it's got really interesting archaeology there for modern kind of period, like that kind of medieval and modern period, as well as it's really deep ancient history from the kind of Neolithic and Bronze Age all the way through.
Yes. Could you tell us, so you've been on a dig in Cyprus. Can you tell us what's a day like on a dig? I guess you'd be up. I guess you'd be up pretty early.
Yeah, we try and dig on the shoulder of summers. So we try not to dig in the middle of the summer heat, but you never, it's hard to predict the weather, that's for sure. Yep. So we do try and start as early as possible to try and get as much of that heavy digging work done before it gets too hot during the day. A typical dig is not what a lot of people expect. A lot of people expect us to be out there with tiny tools and paintbrushes, but realistically we pick up mattocks and shovels and it's heavy labour, as well as that delicate fine work depending on what kind of area you're excavating. So and then in the afternoons we do really fun things like pottery washing, because all the finds that you find have to be cleaned and washed throughout the day, and that's always a fun time to get to know the team that you work with. Yep. And kind of interspersed with that digging, we have a range of specialists that come around and look at individual materials or might be researching a certain type of area, and they kind of share that knowledge with the whole team. And we take students, we take volunteers, we take lots of people from the general public. So everyone it's a really beautiful environment to kind of just share knowledge and work together in that real outdoor kind of way.
So when you're going at it with like picks and like the heavy duty stuff, at what point do you know that, well, we know that there's nothing sort of delicate just under the surface where we're just using our brush and delicate tools? I guess at that point you know that there's nothing there, so you can get into it with a mattock.
Yeah, kind of. We hope so. It's all about understanding soil and soil change.
Okay.
Because, as the layers build up over time, different types of soil might build up. There might be, lots of ashy deposits, for instance, if there was fire, or there might be a lot of rubble because it was used as a stockpiling area, or there's lots of ways that kind of soil builds up over time. And so basically you have a trench supervisor who's a skilled archaeologist who's done this quite a lot, and they help you, if you've never done it before kind of thing, understand that kind of work. So there's always somebody in charge who has a real eye for soil change, and then you kind of have a feel for it. And once you get going, you kind of get to know which tools are the right ones at any time. But yeah, it's definitely interesting when you start using these kind of big tools, but there's lots of techniques that we use that we don't just bang at the ground. You kind of take off layer by layer. Sure. You're just using something big to do it.
And anything you find, would that have to belong to, say, the Cypriot government?
Absolutely. Yeah. So all of the materials and things like that we excavate, we work very closely with a range of different government departments, including the local museums. And this happens no matter where you work around the world. You kind of work with local individuals, councils, museums, people like that who have care for that heritage or that area. And then you also work with permits from the government, antiquity department quite specifically for Cyprus, and we work really closely with them. So anything that we find that all finds, whether they're tiny pieces of cooking ceramics or, beautiful coins or something like that, get catalogued, and then we lodge them with the museums. So depending on how beautiful they are, we might see them on display sometimes. Sherds and things like that are kept so that researchers can keep coming back time and time and time again. And as new knowledge is found, really go back over what we've found from an excavation, reevaluate it, and keep thinking. So it's about accumulating that knowledge. And definitely it stays within the country of origin.
I'm talking to Candace Richards, who is acting curator of the Nicholson Collection of Antiquities at the University of Sydney's Chowchak Wing Museum. So today, Candace, I'd sort of like to focus on the Egyptian collection. But first, when we talk about ancient Egypt, when are we talking? What years are we talking?
Well, I mean, it depends, I suppose. How long's a piece of string sometimes?
Yeah.
But, you know, when we think about ancient Egyptian antiquity, we're really thinking from the Nicholson Collection's point of view, our earliest Egyptian artefacts do come from the Paleolithic period, so pre-dynastic kind of centuries there.
Wow. That's like 3000 BC, before.
Even earlier.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think the earliest materials come from around 5,000 or so BC. I'd have to double check that. But yeah, we have this kind of prehistoric Egyptian material, which has got beautiful cultural artifacts. And then you have a whole range of different kind of pharaonic periods, is what they're often called, the Old Kingdom and the New Kingdom. And the Nicholson Collection has a range of different materials that kind of stretch all the way from that deep antiquity all the way up to, say, the Byzantine or Coptic period. And that's kind of the bookends of our collection here.
It's incredible, really, when you stand there and look at something that is potentially, 5,000 years old. It's sort of mind-boggling. So it is hard to pin the date thing down. Is it the oldest civilization? Because there were the Sumerians of Mesopotamia, the Three Rivers. Then, of course, there's India, and I guess we can't forget about China as well. But if we believe the out of Africa theory, does it make sense that Egypt and Mesopotamia would have been settled first before, say, in India or China, which is so much further east and away from Africa?
Well, actually, I was going to say Australia has some of the oldest cultural heritage in the world.
We do, yeah.
And that, and when we're talking about dates and dating, it obviously there's lots and lots of different techniques that archaeologists, bioarchaeologists can use around the world, depending on the types of material that you might have in an archaeological context. So things like organic remains and different types of materials can be tested in a variety of different scientific techniques to understand date. This is very complicated, obviously, and there's lots and lots of specialists that focus quite specifically on dating for this reason. And things like in Australia, some of the oldest stone tools, which is where in Western Australia, some of the oldest bone implements and things like that in Western Australia have recently been dated to over 45,000 years ago. So the way that people moved around the world, everyone kind of took off in different directions. And so it's a very complicated question.
Yeah.
The
is
word
it out
civilization...
Of Africa still?
Is very loaded because obviously there's a lot of different ideas about what civilization actually means. It was used early on to suggest that some cultures were better than other cultures, which is completely and utterly debunked now. And so it's a really loaded idea as to what constitutes how people moved around and how those cultural groups were formed, and the different, everybody responds to the local environment they have to create their kind of civilization, if you want to use that word. So, yeah, it's a really complicated concept, but dating in particular shows us definitely that people moved from Africa, and different types of Homo species. There's a range of different ones have been found around the world and populating in different areas and things like that. So, yeah, it's a really fascinating, deep history dive there.
So, as you said, the collection was founded by Sir Charles Nicholson when he donated, and in the middle of his tenure, I think, as Deputy Vice-Chancellor, over 3,000 objects to the University for Research Teaching. It sounds like something out of an Agatha Christie movie. It conjures up such a romantic vision of, this man in Egypt collecting. At the time, it would have been a pretty exciting time. Can you give us, sort of paint a picture for us about how it all came about?
Yeah, so Charles Nicholson is such an interesting figure. Like, he was a statesman. He was a part of New South Wales legislative kind of group, was the Speaker of the House kind of thing. And at the same time, that real interesting kind of colonial Sydney was starting to become something different. They wanted really to establish Sydney as, an outpost of places like England, and they wanted it to have that London society feel, for sure. And so you had people like Sir Charles Nicholson, one of the founders of the university. They wanted to create a university that was parallel to the great universities of Oxford and Cambridge. It's reflected in the architecture on the campus, but it's reflected in the collection, because Nicholson used their collection as an idea and went, well, we need an antiquity collection to teach from as well. And so he used his personal wealth, which he'd accumulated in Sydney, in some considerable sums, to travel back throughout Europe, specifically in Italy and Egypt, to collect antiquities. He went a range of other places as well and was very well connected, so he drew upon friends and different kind of people of high society to visit their excavations and find out what was going on. And so the collection that he amassed for the university, especially the Egyptian collection, is fascinating because, about just over 400 objects were first shipped to Sydney from Egypt. The crates were unpacked, down at Circular Quay in the harbour and sent up to the university. And when they were unpacked and kind of pulled out, the range of materials he collected is phenomenal. Yes. We have full mummy coffins, but he didn't just think, I want all the coffins. He was very specific. He obviously had a clear goal in mind, because he collected the coffin of one woman, the coffin of one man, the mummy of one child, and he collected one mystery coffin, all of them from representing different times in ancient Egypt and different ideas in ancient Egypt. And so he collected for an idea to teach from, which meant that we don't have an overabundance of one particular type of thing, but have a range that's really phenomenal. And that's what he was most interested in collecting. So we have things from, he collected animal mummies, he collected like a mummified cat, he collected things like cartonnage masks, he collected mummy wrappings that have the Book of the Dead, spells from the Book of the Dead written on them in hieroglyphs as well as hieratic writing. He collected, different types of sculptural pieces and lots of ceramics, the everyday stuff too. He wasn't just interested in the fancy things, he was interested in the everyday things, including a leather shoe and a piece of bread. From antiquity. So it's a really fascinating collection that he was very passionate to try and make sure he had one of everything to teach from.
I'm talking to Candace Richards, who is acting curator of the Nicholson Collection. That's the Antiquities Collection at the University of Sydney's Chow Chuck Wing Museum. So, Candace, focusing on the Egyptian collection still, how did you and the team design the Egyptian room? The one, as you walk in, the room is on the left. There's three coffins, three mummies. And there's also been some CT imaging going on as well. How did the team come up? I guess it's a collaborative thing because it's a stunning room. It is just incredible. I remember when we went there, it was sort of during the COVID thing, and you couldn't get the kids out of the room. They were, they were just fascinated by it. And I mean, so are we as adults, obviously. So we had to sort of queue up to wait for the kids to sort of finish all the questions of their parents. It was fantastic. But so how did the room come about?
So, there's kind of our Egyptian galleries are two different exhibitions. There's the Mummy Room on the left and then an exhibition called Pharaonic Obsessions on the right.
Yes.
And they interplay off each other in a really interesting way, I think. And the reason why I say that is because you're right, it is a collaborative team effort that you have curatorial people working on the exhibitions, myself and senior curator Jamie Fraser, who has moved on from us to go to work in the British Museum.
Oh, wow. Gee.
And then an Egyptologist called Dr. Connie Lord worked a lot with these particular collections and exhibitions. And what was really great about this kind of collaborative process, so we're the curatorial team, and then we have our wonderful director, Paul Donnelly, we have Luke Parker, who's in charge of our exhibitions manager, and we also brought in a design team as well to work on these exhibitions. And so the design team were called SP3 or Studio Plus 3. And so all of us together having big brainstorming sessions around, big tables full of paper and images and architectural drawings of the museum, because we were planning all of this stuff when the museum wasn't even built yet. I must say that one of the hardest things was trying to come up with ideas for a space you've never seen before.
Yeah, yes.
Oh, gosh. Yes. But it also gave you complete freedom to come up with different kind of schemes and what we thought we were interested in learning about. But really, to try and answer the questions we get asked the most by the general public is kind of how I started working with the Egyptian collection quite specifically.
Yes.
Pharaonic Obsessions is to try and answer the question, why? How did it get here and why? Why is Australia so fascinated with ancient Egypt? And there's lots and lots and lots of connections between Egypt and Australia that are teased out, and the research has shown that we've had this ongoing connection since Charles Nicholson founded the collection.
Yes.
And then the Mummy Room has really been designed to answer those other questions, which is about that deep scientific research of mummified remains. These are humans that lived in the ancient world.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling.
They obviously never foresaw that they'd get put on a boat and shipped to this far-off land.
Yes.
And so we really wanted to make sure that we respected their ideas and their culture, but also reflected that modern science engagement with archaeology, which has become, there's lots of documentaries out at the moment. I think Netflix even has a couple of documentaries on about, excavations in Egypt that kind of propel this exciting interest. And so the exhibitions have been designed quite specifically to answer those questions and also to make a fun space, because really, I mean, the idea of kids hanging out in there and not wanting to leave is exactly what we wanted.
Yes,
the museum is a place to create lifelong learners and for children to get excited about history and antiquity. So the more time they spend in there, the better, is kind of what our goal was.
And there are three mummies in the room. Can you tell us about them? Who are they?
So the first coffin you see as you come in, his name is Ashiket. The human remains that were donated with that coffin, or collected by Sir Charles Nicholson with that coffin, have been proven to actually come from a much later period. The coffin itself dates to around 750 BC, but the remains are Roman, so probably 1st, 2nd century AD. And he's a really beautiful coffin, and he's standing up as you kind of come in, and so his remains are not on display. The other three mummies are named Merowa, Horus, and Menethrates. Now, I'm not pronouncing them the way that the ancient Egyptians would have pronounced these names. These are kind of the anglicised version of the hieroglyphs that we have. Yes. And the reason why we know the names of each of them is because the coffins, or in the case of Horus, a piece of papyrus, all tell us their name. And that was really important part of getting into the afterlife, is to have your name remembered. It accompanies a lot of the spells and things like that to make sure the gods give you a safe passage into the afterlife. And so all of the coffins are covered in beautiful imagery of gods and goddesses, of hieroglyphs, of spells, to make sure
go on.
you get there safely.
Okay, I was going to say the hieroglyphs on the outside of the coffins and all the script around in the tomb too, I suppose. Is that an appeal to the gods, or is it a person's life story?
A bit of both. So we find out a little bit about these people through through the coffin kind of inscription. So that's how we get their names. We know that Ashiket was a royal scribe, for instance, because it's told to us in the hieroglyphs. But the hieroglyphs them also are formulaic spells that help you get to the afterlife. And so mummies in ancient Egypt, or people in ancient Egypt, I should say, rather mummies, they weren't called mummies, people in ancient Egypt, would often ask for different types of spells to be included on their coffins. Some of them are pretty straightforward spells. I think one of the most common is the judgment, or the spell related to basically the weighing of the heart against the weight of a feather. Because if your heart is lighter than a feather, it means you've been good and you can get into the afterlife. If your heart is heavier than a feather, it means you've been particularly bad in your life, and your soul is basically devoured by this crocodile-headed beast. And so there's spells to make sure that you get there as well, because it's quite a journey to get into the afterlife. You actually continue to there's three parts of the soul in ancient Egypt. One part kind of stays with your physical form, another part lives in the afterlife, and there's another that goes by day and by night through the afterlife and kind of returns to you, and it's kind of a real moving afterlife, and your soul can be trapped at any point, can be kind of come across things like cockroaches and crocodiles and beasts, mythological creatures. So there are lots and lots and lots of spells, I think, to kind of help you get there.
And I guess
one of which is my favourite. One of which is my favourite because we're Sydney siders is that there's like spells for defeating cockroaches. It's like I really wish I could use some of those in our West apartments.
Yes, indeed. And who writes all this stuff? I guess the priests come up with the ideas, and there would be, I guess, scribes who would do the work. Or is it a relative of the person? Or
no, absolutely, you're right. You're right. Your first instincts are right. Priests and scribes. There's lots of temples. Reading and writing and literacy in the ancient world is not what we kind of have literacy as now. You would be taught. We have a fabulous sculpture up on display that is actually a seated scribe, and he's got a piece of papyrus kind of draped over his legs, and he says the hieroglyphs on that explain that he is the son of another scribe. So it could be a family trade that gets passed down, reading and writing.
Yes.
And so then you get employment to do these things. And so, yes, the embalmers and the priests had scribes that could do this work. Yes. And so you often find that the spells are not, while the names are inserted and the kind of who you are is definitely added to your particular coffin, the spells themselves are recited over and over and over again. They're formulas and formulaic inscriptions.
Because I love the bit about while somebody is mentioning your name, you live, and if that stops, then you die. It's all in sort of memory.
It is really a beautiful idea in that, it's connected with the concept of memory, really. Why do we have, we all have tombstones, we leave memorial plaques in which we put our names on as well. And it's really the same idea that, to be remembered is to live forever. To have people who know who you are and know your name and know your story is to continue to live in some way. And the Egyptian ancient cultural belief is definitely connected to that idea.
Yes.
That you could live forever because your names are remembered.
Yes.
But it's something that we come across in lots and lots of cultures as well, is this simple concept that it's what we have left at the end is memory. And I think it's really beautiful. Outside of the Egyptian collection, is some of our Roman epitaphs, and they're also tombstones with people's names written on them and who they were. And I think it's a really beautiful role that museums can play today is to remember these people from many, many years ago.
Absolutely.
Thousands of years in the case of the Nicholson Collection, and to retell their story and to imagine all the people they were connected to as well. So it is a really beautiful concept. And one of the things that I think doesn't get discussed enough around this idea is that while we do have these people, Paddy Asheket, Meroa, Menethotep, these are to get a coffin, to be embalmed, to have a sarcophagus, to have a tomb. We're talking about the elite level of society. We're talking about people that were affluent enough to have this. But there are so many more people in ancient Egypt that we don't know the names of because they were, there's lots of slaves in ancient Egypt, but also just lower members of society. To be embalmed was... and to be immortal was, definitely related to your social class.
When you walk into the museum, there are 3 different collections, and it just all works so well together. You get the connections, you get the way it's all put together why this is with that, and how do you all work? I guess you all must have big team meetings and talk about those kinds of things. How does that all work? Can you just sort of run us through that, Candace? If that
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is what I love about working here, is that I have such a crazy array of collaborative colleagues that all have their own special interest or specialities and backgrounds. I'm incredibly fortunate in that my very first job in a museum was working in the back of house, in behind the scenes, doing what we call the audit of the collection. And so I actually did a lot of audits of the Macleay collections as well as the art collection, basically with a list ticking things off shelves. So I got to know, my fellow curators really well in my very first job before working as a curator and working collaboratively. So I was really fortunate to get to know everyone for a really long time, and even though we've only just come together under one roof, we've really been a part of the same team underneath David Ellis, our director.
Yes.
For, nearly 15 years now.
Okay.
And so what's been really wonderful is being able to show people the collaborative nature of our work. And so, yes, we do have team meetings. We have meetings focused on things like exhibition development, especially during the beginning of the Chow Chak Wing Museum's kind of nesting period or cocoon period, in which we were thinking about all the ways our collections could come together. And then we also have meetings about our programming, what kind of talks do we want to do, what kind of, who do we want to invite to give lectures. We also have programming meetings around what kinds of ideas we want to use for the next kind of phasing of exhibitions for the next, 5 to 10 years. What is the stories that we want to tell? And some of these stories might be, something very specific to the Nicholson Collection, or something very specific to, say, the Macleay Pacific Island Collection or something like that. Yes. But also we have an opportunity to talk about, which ideas are actually cross-cultural and how do they relate? And so one of the exhibitions that I'm most proud of being a part of is that I'm the curator of an exhibition called Animal Gods, which actually uses the butterflies from the Macleay collection to tell the stories of the Trojan War and the Odyssey.
Oh, wow.
And people would not necessarily think that those things could go together, but things like the natural history specimens, particularly the butterflies, were named by Linnaeus, the father of taxonomy, after characters from ancient mythology. Wow. And because of that, I have this array of butterflies that I could play with. And because my colleagues in the Macleay collections, Jude, Philp and Tony Gill quite specifically, were really keen on the idea, they helped me, and Matt Huan, who's an entomologist, helped to pull this idea together and find the specimens in the collection and tell the stories. And so there's actually two narratives to that exhibition, one on the back wall, which tells you the ancient story, and then on the label rail tells you the history of taxonomy, because those two things are actually entwined in a way that most people wouldn't recognise.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Sounds just absolutely incredible. You're a very lucky person.
I am. I'm actually doing this interview from our storerooms down in the basement of the Chow Chak Wing Museum, which is really fantastic. And so I'm actually sitting amongst an array of material from the ancient world. And behind me I've got Greek and Roman sculpture and Cypriot pottery. And in front of me I have some beautiful fish nets and things like that from our P&G collection. And so it actually is a collaborative space.
Yeah. Candace, thanks so much for talking to us today. We could probably talk on and on and on and on and on, because it's such a wide and varied and wonderful subject. So thank you so much for talking to us, and hopefully we can talk again about some of the other collections of the Nicholson collection.
That'd be brilliant. Thank you so much for having me on.